Now that you can install SteamOS on practically any AMD-based PC handheld, why should you? Like, what are the practical benefits of installing SteamOS? Because, yes, there are things that are more abundantly clear, like usability improvements, and overall quality of life stuff. But how does using SteamOS impact gaming on handhelds where it wasn't originally designed for? We've seen many instances of things like Bazite running on PC handhelds, and they improve gaming, but not by a huge amount. In some cases, it's just a rounding number that is essentially decided in how different they are. It's like, oh, is it more like 30 or is it more like 31 FPS? And it doesn't really matter. I have a few games where I think it actually means quite a bit, especially given the fact that you can obviously change the resolution. And being able to lower the resolution in this instance actually might help a lot, compounding increasing performance to a point where getting something like a Z2 Extreme might seem a little pointless. Just throw SteamOS on it and boom, you got performance upgrades and battery upgrades thanks to the Switch. Though, like I said before, there are some caveats that you will have to live with if you make the switch. I think there's a game that really showcases the overall improvements you'll see. Spider-Man is a great game. In running at 900p medium at the 30-watt TDP, you'll see improvements in terms of frame rate in quite some significant ways. It goes from being a almost 50, maybe 55 FPS experience to a pretty rock solid 60 FPS experience while maintaining a nice 900p medium resolution. Yes, that is not the full 1080p of the display, but the lowering the resolution and switching over to SteamOS makes it a almost constant 60 FPS experience with mild fluctuations to the point where you probably really won't notice it. In Windows, you can see dips as far low as the upper 30s, when the lowest I ever saw it for SteamOS was like the low 50s, upper 40s. So for that, I think it's pretty good, and it's just a higher base level of performance in overall smoothness that most people would probably notice and appreciate. And that also goes a long way for battery life. It might depend on the game, but running the display at 50% brightness and running it at the lowest wattage possible at about 5 to 10 watts, you should expect to gain a whole extra hour of gameplay on top of whatever you can get on Windows. But that might really depend on what game you play. If you're playing something like Elden Ring, that might be a little bit less. But if you're playing something more normal, like a racing game or something like that, consistently an hour overall battery improvement is something you should be able to expect, which is phenomenal, especially when you play games that are super intensive, like, again, Elden Ring. Depending on what settings and what power profile you're using, that game could last like 45 minutes to an hour. And switching over to something with SteamOS can increase that by about an hour to bringing you to almost 2 hours of total gameplay, which is super amazing. And if you throw in a battery upgrade kit to the, what it was, like 74 or 64 watt hour battery packs you can upgrade these things with, you can see massive increases in battery life, performance, and just make your overall experience significantly better to pretty much be the upgrade you want when comparing it to something with a Z2 Extreme when those eventually come out. Another great example of a game that runs super well in SteamOS is The Witcher 3. At 900p low 30 watt, you get about 70 FPS in this incredibly dense area, while the Windows version gets about 60 at 65 at the high end, which is not a huge difference, but it just is way more playable and way more of a consistent experience. But there are the downsides of SteamOS that you might want to take in consideration when deciding this, like not being able to play the 100% of your SteamOS library. If you play games that use things like Easy Anti-Cheat, BattleEye, or Vanguard, you might run into some issues because it is Linux based, and most of those anti-cheat do not play well with Linux. But there are some workarounds to get some of these games to work. I've seen people manage to get things like Valorant and Battlefield 6 to work, but that has mixed results. Some people have been banned for trying to get around it because it is technically anti-cheat evasion, so be careful if you do try to do that. And there's always going to be some level of jankiness for games that haven't gotten any updates or are just so niche that there hasn't been really any optimizations made to make it a better experience on Linux. So your favorite game might not work in SteamOS. There's also tools though for you to check to see whether or not your game is compatible with ProtonDB. There are other advantages though to switching to something with SteamOS on it. Primarily things like emulation. Emulation is way easier to do with Linux. But with tools like EmuDeck making their way to Windows, that argument is kind of moot, but overall emulation is still easier to do on Linux, and that you have a vast library of community-made tools to improve that overall experience, and just more headroom for extra performance. So if you're trying to emulate something like PS3 or Wii U or something more exotic, the extra headroom that you get with SteamOS would help a long way in improving gameplay of those kinds of games. And I know this question is going to be asked in the comments and said in the comments, why not do you just dual boot? Well, it's a bit more complicated of an answer. Because there is no official way to dual boot quite yet, you have to go through third-party means to do so in other applications, and it's just way more of a jankier experience that the average consumer might not want to do, especially if you're getting help or following a tutorial. It would go a long way in improving the experience if there was a first-party solution, in which Valve is allegedly working on a dual booting solution, because it's not just for people to dual boot into Windows. There's people who want to dual boot into something like Batocera or other Linux-based operating systems. And once Microsoft allows third-party devices to run their modified versions of Windows designed for handheld gaming, I could see more people wanting a dual booting solution so they can try all the different kinds of flavors of handheld-based operating systems. But now that we've mentioned the Windows Microsoft operating system that the Xbox Ally is coming with, some of you might be thinking, why not do I just wait for that? And you know, as I was writing this section, I didn't think about that one. I'll be honest, I really didn't take that into consideration when coming up with this video. This whole video kind of feels silly now because that is allegedly going to be very much similar to SteamOS, but it's going to have all the advantages of Windows while removing all of the background bloat, which Windows is very famous for, which is primarily the reason why you see things like worse battery life in Windows compared to SteamOS. It's less of that SteamOS is just better for battery life, it's that there's just less stuff going on in the background in comparison. So assuming that they remove most of it, that Windows version should see battery improvements as well if you installed on something with a Z1 later down the line. And it should have less restrictions on what hardware you use with it, so that one would be more compatible with something like an Intel-based chip, which is something that SteamOS currently doesn't support. Bazzite does, so you could use Bazzite. Either way, let's just assume that doesn't exist and Microsoft is going to be kind of a whole dick about it and not let other people use their really cool operating system, and let's just assume that SteamOS is the only option. And yeah, it's a great alternative to Windows on your ROG Ally or Legion Go. If you're a person who's waiting for the Z3 before you would even consider getting a new PC handheld, SteamOS might be a great way to see better performance and increased battery life without having to make any sort of investment in improving the experience other than putting in a little bit of your time, especially now that there's just a list of instructions you can follow on Valve's website on how to install SteamOS on your device. Other than that, I would love to hear what you guys think. Have you considered installing SteamOS on your handheld? Have you tried it already and liked it? I would love to hear what you guys think about this down below. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, all the other social media coverage down below. And last but not least, have a wonderful day.